Hello, and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab talk. It's our last talk of the semester. I'm Sarah Wallison. I'm the director of the MIT Lab, and I am wearing a orange and black and blue shirt with a black jacket, and I have gray hair and glasses. I also want to acknowledge that we are sitting on the unceded territory of the Massachusetts peoples, as well as their neighbors, the Wampanoag and the Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for generations. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Michaela Ternasky-Holland and Alana Selkowitz from the heralded Games for Change organization. For anyone who doesn't know it, it's a really important organization in the games world. They provide resources and support for people who are working with games for social change. They're heading up this relatively new initiative from 2017, the XR for Change. And the idea behind it is to develop a community of practice to use immersive media to address real-world challenges. I first met Michaela virtually when she explained to me this major campaign they had for the documentary On the Morning You Wake, a VR project, which we're going to learn about today. And it's truly impressive and inspiring. For so many of us working in the VR field, it's really hard to get your work out there. There aren't clear, established, distribution places or ways to have impact. So we're really excited to hear about how they do it. Michaela is an award-winning immersive media maker. She was recently named one of the 100 original voices of XR. Her work's been featured at Time, Forbes, The Guardian, Cannes Film Festival, Sundance, Tribeca, and the New York Public Library. Alana is a senior director of programs and partnerships at Games for Change, and in this capacity, she leads business development efforts and manages strategic partnerships. And before Games for Change, I actually met her. She was at Unity Technologies for over 4 years. So I'm going to turn it over to them and welcome them. Welcome, Alana and Michaela.
Well, thank you so much for having us, MIT Open Doc Lab. As was said, my name is Michaela. Currently, I'm working with Games for Change as the head of XR, and working specifically with On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World. I take on an impact producer role and a creative strategy role. And I'll let Alana say a few words about herself.
Hello, I'm Alana. I am wearing a black hat, a black mask. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a colorful sweater on. I, as Sarah mentioned, am working on partnerships at Games for Change across all of our various programs, including XR for Change. And I'm really excited to be here today to speak with you.
And for those listening, I'm also wearing a hat. It's orange, and I'm wearing a purple jacket. And I have Asian features and dark black hair. I'm going to continue now to talk about the project. The interesting thing about On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World is that it starts with a question. And that question is, can we create an experience about nuclear weapons threat that is humanizing? The biggest concern that a lot of nuclear weapons threat experts have is that oftentimes nuclear weapons threat is talked about in a materialistic standpoint. There are this many weapons in the world, and this is how vast the destruction can be, and this is scientifically what they can do once they're detonated in the world, right? But I think for us as humans, and for all of us as storytellers, and for you all as documentary creators, the biggest thing about connection is about making it human. And it's about making it feel personalized to the person that is being told a story. And the connection points for On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World came to us through Princeton University when Alex Glazer, the head of Princeton's Science and Global Security program, came to Games for Change and said, we want to create a VR experience that is humanizing. And that really kicked off years of production. I'm going to just play the trailer for you all in the background while I talk. So when Princeton University approached Games for Change, they had no idea who they wanted to work with and in what capacity they wanted to work with. They just knew they had some extra funding from a MacArthur grant, and they knew they wanted to use VR. And so Games for Change became a really key executive producer and partner, and went and sought out some of the best creators in both the documentary field as well as in the virtual reality, augmented reality, XR field. And they landed upon Atlas V and Archer's Mark. Atlas V and Archer's Mark are very well known for their previous work known as Notes on Blindness, which is seen as a very tentpole piece of virtual reality that was premiered earlier in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 15, 2015. And so they decided to do a sophomoric project, and that sophomoric project became On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World. So I think a big part of like creating a really successful team is having that centralized question. I'm going to go back to it one more time. How do we humanize nuclear weapons threat? And it turned out there was someone at Princeton University that Alex worked very closely with along as a kind of a co-leader in this security program, and that was Tamara Lilinoy Patton. And she was an indigenous Hawaiian woman who came to MIT to continue her studies in nuclear weapons threat. And in 2018, she received a lot of text messages one day while she was sitting at the library here at MIT. And those text messages were from friends and family who had received a false ballistic missile alert message. And if anyone isn't aware, this is a real event that happened to Hawaiians. And it turned out to be false. But for 38 minutes, people thought that a ballistic missile was actually incoming. And this became what we call the spark, or what we call kind of the nucleus of the project. And from there, it just grew and expanded. When Games for Change set out with Archer's Mark and Atlas V, we decided to use the issue in Hawaii and what happened in Hawaii to make the reality of nuclear weapons threat feel very present in today's world. When they started this project, nuclear weapons threat had become this archaic issue that everyone associated with the Cold War and also associated with Hiroshima and Japan. And the reality is there was a woman in Hawaii that experienced both a false ballistic missile alert and was a survivor of Hiroshima. So these events don't happen very far apart, and nuclear weapons are still a very relevant issue for today's global security. Of course, now we all realize that, right, because of the recent events with Putin and the invade on Ukraine. But at the time, it was a real big question of how are we going to bring this to the public's eye? How are we going to bring this to the understanding and the awareness, which is a word we use a lot, right? Awareness. So at the point where they decided to complete the project, they were saying, well, what is this awareness we want to build? What is this impact we want to create? And that's where Games for Change approached me and said, who can kind of help us understand what this impact campaign should involve? It's not just about disarming nuclear weapons, but it's also about creating a robust experience around this VR documentary. So this is a little bit about our campaign. These are some of the words we strung together. We really want to highlight the fact that we want to inspire people. The project is really centered around the takeaway of hope and inspiration. It's built around a 3-chapter, that slide's not in here. It's built around a 3-chapter experience. Chapter 1 is called Take Cover, which really highlights the Hawaii incident, and it's about 12 minutes long. Chapter 2 is called Doomsday Machine, and it takes us back in time to the creation of nuclear weapons, to Hiroshima, and also to the geopolitical standpoint and the geopolitical impact that nuclear weapons have. But then Chapter 3 is called Kuleana, which is an indigenous word meaning responsibility. And it really takes the audience into this reality that if we all shared a equitable responsibility to each other and to the world, both at the civilian level and at the government level, there would be no need to have these nuclear weapons. And the reality is, too, if you want to break down the data, nuclear weapons only exist in 9 countries. So you only have to get about 150 people to believe that they don't need to exist, and you could eradicate the world of nuclear weapons. So the one thing we also do in this project is that we really try to make this a very digestible, we can do this, we're not very far away, instead of creating this big, large, existential narrative around it, which is also what happens sometimes in experiences and stories. So I like to talk about words and how words can really affect our viewpoint of the world. And the 3 words we really highlight in our impact strategy for On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World is home, safety, and security. So I just want everybody in the audience to just take a moment and think about, what does home mean to you? Maybe you think of family. Maybe you think of a location. Maybe you think of a physical building. Maybe you think of a feeling. Okay, so then what does safety mean to you? The word safety. Maybe you think about law enforcement, or you think about items like your phone gives you a sense of safety, right? You can always GPS and find your place and where you're going to go. Or maybe safety is the feeling you get when somebody is nearby. And then security. What does security mean? Again, is that the use of items? Is that the use of people in social constructs like governments? Is that the use of walls and spaces that make you feel secure? And the question is, how do those three words intersect with one another? How do they conflict? When does your security conflict with your feeling of home? When does your safety conflict with your idea of security? Maybe one person or one government's idea of security is totally different than your idea of safety. And that's some of the pinpoints that we try to highlight in the actual impact strategy of this project. So one of the things we want to really highlight also is that we ultimately stand for peace. I think a lot of times it's very difficult for documentary projects to take a real stance. What is this stance? The stance is we want to disarm nuclear weapons. We're not shying away from the word of disarmament. We're not shying away from the word elimination. It's really about making sure we're clear it's about eradication and not reducing or not shifting the words to make them seem more soft or more palatable to specific audiences. And I think that's one of the strongest parts of this project is that we ask ourselves, how can we change the story, not just for right now, but for our future generations? So we try to really pull it out of some of the narrative and context of like, that government said this, so then this government feels like they need to do that. It's not about the reality right now that we're facing that can get really nuanced. It's about our future and how we can change the story. Because the story of Hawaii is this false ballistic missile alert, what could have happened. But that's the what could have happened that we rely on every day. So I'm just building the context for how we think about this impact campaign, because it's not just we roll out a box of VR headsets and we put people in VR. It's also about thinking about what kind of experience we're building around the headset-based material. So I am going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Alana, to talk a little bit about how we approach partnerships and how those partnerships connect back to impact.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michaela. That was really wonderful. So in full transparency, I have only been at Games for Change for about a few months. So I have not been as knee-deep in this project as Michaela has been. And as obviously you can see the passion that she has for the work that she's doing. But I am really excited about the work we're doing with this project and other projects we have coming up and how we think about shaping campaigns around those projects to ensure that the right people are seeing them and that we're really getting the awareness and education out there around issues like nuclear disarmament and other issues that we're trying to tackle around mental health, around women's reproductive rights, around the environment, and all of those things that are really important to each and every one of us. All of our work is really focused on the 17 UN SDG goals. So that's really where we like to work, is within those 17 spaces in the social impact space. So really, we are trying to find ways to make VR and other experiences accessible. And we do that by finding different types of partners. So the types of partners I work with include brands that can help support the, sharing of these types of experiences, museums to help with the campaigns, the impact campaigns that we're putting on for these various experiences. We're also partnering with nonprofits for the subject matter expertise, both for actually in the process of creating On the Morning You Wake as an example, but also then creating these wraparound materials that Michaela mentioned, and then creating a curriculum around this where we could bring these types of projects into schools. I know recently On the Morning You Wake was shown to a public school in New York, correct? A class of students. So we really are trying to get a lot of different touch points and different types of partnerships to support this work as it spreads around the world. Additionally, policymakers, right? So places like the UN and the Nobel Peace Center have also screened this experience. So it's about making the public aware, but it's also about finding people who can actually help bring this, vision to life. How do we get nuclear disarmament on the table and make that something that can happen in our lifetime, hopefully? And then on the education piece, we have a huge part of our org at Games for Change, which is it's a modest organization, but about half of our team works on the learn side of the business, where they're really focused on education and reaching students and reaching diverse populations. So really partnering with them on that curriculum to make sure that it's impactful for students in schools, but also for visitors in museums, and coming together to really build those materials to make this something that's more than just, as Michaela said, popping on a headset and watching an experience. We want people to have a takeaway. We want people to leave the experience and know these are the actions we can take and should take to try to help make a difference for this specific issue. So in this case, nuclear disarmament, but again, across all the different issues that you guys might be building experiences for. It's really important to find that direct message that Michaela was saying, that, this is what we're looking to do, and then also motivate people to do that work. And so that's something that's really important to us.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings we have at Games for Change is we're always trying to build a constellation or a kaleidoscope of partners and organizations. And just like in a kaleidoscope or just like in a constellation, there's different sizes of organizations. There are different levels of funding those organizations bring. Some organizations don't bring any funding and they say, can you help us raise funding? Or some organizations bring forward the idea of a specific audience that we want to reach. And so we always find value in any partnership. I think a lot of times when people think partnership, right, they think money, or they think development funds, or they think XYZ. And the reality is, like, we've worked with grassroots organizations, we've worked with big museums, we've worked with no budgets, we've worked with huge budgets. So that idea of building a constellation or a kaleidoscope of partners and organizations and entities is really important. And a big part of what some of those bring to us, not just within the US, but also internationally, is localization. And so accessibility, partnerships, this is all sort of these like buzzwords, but the reality of what these buzzwords give us is a very clear roadmap of how we can create real life impact. So see, these are some of the incredible impact partners we've been able to work with. I will briefly touch upon some of them, and then I will let Alana, I think we have one that Alana will touch upon after this. So ICANN is a grassroots organization. N-Square is an incredible organization that that works alongside of nuclear weapons threat disarmament from all different angles, such as art, such as science. Nobel Peace Center really works around global peace and security, so nuclear disarmament is very much aligned with their vision. I believe the number is 8 to 10 Nobel Peace Laureates that have been awarded in the past have actually been awarded specific to nuclear weapons disarmament. So it very much aligned with their visions and their mission. And then the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is actually an incredible journalism organization that showcases work around what are man-made threats. And they've been a huge impact partner for us as well. We've also had some funders in the space. So this is going to be Alana's slide, just to talk a little bit about how we find funding and what kind of funding organizations are interested in this kind of work.
Absolutely. So we have a team of 3 people at Games for Change that are really focused on different types of partnerships. We look at brands, we also look at foundations, and then we also work with nonprofits. So again, like as Michaela said, not everybody's necessarily giving us money, but we're partnering in different ways for different reasons. So I know Michaela has been working hand in hand with Meta on the partnership. So I'd rather you share that,
Sure.
The details of kind of what we're doing there.
Yeah. So, I mean, Meta, say what you will about the company as a whole. I don't think we need to get into those specifics right now. Those might come up in the Q&A. But the organizations within the organization of Meta is this ginormous working machine, and there are really clear verticals that align with Games for Change. The vertical of Meta VR for Good, the vertical of Meta Immersive Learning, and Meta Immersive Education. And so those are really the people we liaison with. Meta VR for Good funded the production, but has also come in to fund some of the impact. And then Meta Immersive Learning is actually coming in to help us fund some research. So these are different ideas around funding, right? I think a lot of times we think just about getting the project done, and this is a production, and I need to get it out in the world. But there's other aspects you can find funding for, like the impact strategy, like localization, and as well as like one thing I think a lot of people take for granted is research. People are really interested in like how you can take apart and put back together both qualitative and quantitative data around the ways that your project is making an impact or around the ways that your project is changing people's mindset and behavior.
There are also opportunities so I come from Unity for Humanity at Unity, and there were certain projects where we funded that were built on older VR platforms where we gave a specific, grant to support converting it to the newer Quest 2 to make it more accessible and more easily transportable versus a tethered headset. So something to think about for existing projects too. There might be some funding out there specific to kind of bringing that to new formats. Same with bringing things from Magic Leap to, the Quest Pro. So there are going to be opportunities out there because Meta and other folks are interested in the accessibility of those devices.
So one thing that I think makes Games for Change really unique in our approach to how we did this impact campaign strategy for On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World is that we didn't just rely on the creative team and the executive production team for subject matter. Obviously, that team at Princeton and that team at Archer's Mark and Atlas V, they worked very hard on getting the virtual reality experience finished. But then once the VR experience was finished, outside of doing some film festivals, they were burnt out. They wanted to move on. They wanted to start creating their own project, and I think that's great. The reality, though, is that we were facing a monumental task and needed access to incredible subject experts to not just help us shape the impact campaign and strategy, but also to be spokespeople for us, and also to be representatives of the project for us. And so I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite slides to present our incredible impact fellows for this project. Lovely Umayam comes from a background working on the Hill in nuclear weapons policy and has since left nuclear weapons policy on the political front and has created her own arts collective that creates and builds art around nuclear weapons and sort of creates this incredible nuanced existential art form around how nuclear weapons can be both beautiful things and also these insanely scary, massive weapons of destruction. And really working with cultural entities such as nuclear weapons testing victims to build and create their stories using art forms. Ray Atchison is an amazing organizer, activist, also associated with nuclear Nobel Peace Laureate winning organization ICANN. And they really work at the forefront of all of these grassroots activism and justice. They are always present at United Nations events. They are always speaking on behalf of nuclear weapons disarmament activists. A fact about them is that when Putin invaded Ukraine, they were a part of the the call for peace that the United Nations put forward. They actually helped draft that. They were in the room making that piece of that statement happen. And then Cynthia Lazaroff, who, interesting enough, actually started her journey with nuclear weapons threat when she was younger, working within the Cold War era, and then left nuclear weapons threat to pursue climate change, then survived the false ballistic missile alert of Hawaii because she lived on Kauai at the time and returned to nuclear weapons threat. So Cynthia actually is featured in the documentary VR Experience and now speaks on behalf of the nuclear weapons threat community, and has really strong ties towards Russia. And a lot of the work she's been doing is around peacekeeping between US and Russia. So you're saying, okay, Michaela, you keep saying the word wraparound materials, you keep saying the word wraparound materials, what are you talking about? And the reality is wraparound materials is anything that sits outside of the VR headset. We are really talking about materials that literally wrap around the experience you create. And you're probably asking me, like, why is that? So my personal preference is that I think that VR is a really good tool, but I don't think VR is an all-encompassing experience, which is very, very ironic because the whole idea of VR is to be an encompassing experience. But to have someone put on a headset, have someone take off a headset and go back into their daily lives, I don't think it's a very effective use of the medium. My background is with Disney, and a lot of the things we always thought about with Disney is guest experience and compassion, empathetic guest experience design, which I'm sure a lot of you kind of are aware of or know about. And so I like to think of VR as a Disneyland ride, right? What is the queue experience? What story are we building before they even get into headset? What is the actual ride they ride, the VR experience? And then when they get off the ride or when they take the headset off, what experience are they having once they leave? And usually with like a Disney or a commercialized experience, it's like a gift shop, right? Like you get to walk around, you get to select things, but it's still a continuation of the story. And so I think something that's really unique is that all of our wraparound materials are branded. All of our wraparound materials feel like they live in the world of On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World, which might feel like it's kind of a aesthetic detail, but what I like to think of it is as like an extension of the immersion in the headset, right? Everything feels like an extension of the experience. So when I hand you an onboarding survey, it's not going to look like a black and white research survey that a university puts together. It actually looks like a piece of content built from the world of On the Morning You Wake to the End of the World. Same idea when we create high school curriculum or high school screenings. We really try to think about how can we engage these high school students to feel like we put time and effort into the materials we're creating, and we're not just handing them a lesson plan that's black and white or handing them something that doesn't feel like it was given to them with care. That idea of also taking care of somebody also connects to how we put somebody in a headset. So we never assume someone's first time in a headset. We never assume it's someone's 100th time in a headset. We always assume we're going to meet that person wherever they are. So we always ask, hey, is this your first time in a headset? We always say, hey, if it's uncomfortable, if it doesn't feel right, let me know. I don't want you to have an uncomfortable experience. If you get lost at any time, you're always welcome to like raise your hand and let me know you're there. And that might seem like very basic ideas, but I think a lot of us forget that that's a part of having that human connection. VR is so intimate. You're not just throwing somebody into a movie theater and letting them watch a big screen. You're actually having this like very close personal experience with them. And that experience should feel human. It's not just, there's a headset right there, put it on, let me know what you think about the project. How are you going to create a connection to that person, build the idea of empathy or build the idea of change if you don't and your staff don't, or whoever else you're training to be a representative of the project don't exemplify those emotions or exemplify the care that you're trying to have towards the person to help them understand the concept you're trying to bring them into. And nuclear weapons threat's really effing scary. So we try to have a very like gentle approach to people. And then the word care is really important to me because that's what we use for our after experience. Some people call it offboarding, some people call it integration. I call it aftercare. When someone comes out of a headset, they're coming back into reality. It's literal. And so in that way, you also need to think about how you're taking care of that person coming out of the headset. So we always try to set up a quiet space. We try not to set up the experience where they feel they're exposed to a huge crowd. We try to make sure people feel like they are having a one-to-one moment. Like once Alana gets out of headset, I train my staff to say, how are you feeling? Do you need a moment? Take all the time you need. When you're ready, we just have a couple activities for you. And if you need to leave at any time, you're welcome to leave at any time. So we really give people the opportunity to exit. And you're probably saying, okay, Michaela, but like, what does this have to do with an impact campaign? And I think what I'm trying to say is an impact campaign is all about every single person you touch. It's about quality. It's not always about quantity. That's also why we use the word mobilization instead of distribution, because it's not about making money back for the project. It's about mobilizing the project to multiple people. And so every single person you have a quality experience with, not just in headset, but also outside of headset, is a potential person that you can impact. So you're like, okay, but like beyond just taking care of people and how you talk to people, what are you actually doing to get headsets to people? And this is exactly what we're doing. So these are our VR headset loaner kits that we've put together at Games for Change for On the Morning You Wake. It consists of 4 Quest 2 headsets, 4 pairs of headphones that are noise canceling. We also have power strips so we can charge everything without having to rely on the venue's power. And we also have chargers and batteries. And so what this basically allows us to do is it allows us to have a pop-up VR activation everywhere we go. And not just Games for Change. We've actually built and created these headset loaner kits for grassroots organizations who want to mobilize the project for their organization. We've trained their staff to be able to put their policymakers that they're speaking to every day into headset, or be able to put their fellow grassroots organizers into headset. So it's not just about Games for Change being the institution that knows it all. It's also about us sharing this opportunity, sharing this knowledge, and sharing the technology. So these headset cases also include 2 iPads. That's for our wraparound material. So we have a way to be able to allow people to engage with the project before and after the headset-based experience. But we've also not included iPads and provided people with QR codes. All of our wraparound materials are cloud-based, so they can easily be duplicated, replaced, updated per the location. So for example, if I say, hey, we're doing this thing in New York, I might say, great, can we get NICAN to send us their up-to-date push they're trying to do at New York City Council so we can add that to our wraparound materials. Okay, well, next week we're in Poland. Okay, duplicate the wraparound materials. Let's talk to some people in Poland. What items in Poland should we put in the wraparound materials? So everything is very flexible and everything can be very personalized and localized to whatever organization or to wherever these kits are going. And these kits have been all over the world, which is really fun. And they're Pelican Air kits, so they can be shipped, they can also fly, and they can be checked. And it has been really successful. Alrighty, I'm gonna hand the mic back over to Alana to talk about some of our target audiences and some of the ways our activations have connected back to those target audiences.
Oh, interesting. I will do my best because I have not seen this slide before.
You got this.
So I think we talked about this at length previously, but really we are trying to reach a lot of different audiences with this message because there are so many different touch points. So one of I think the most impactful audiences when you're trying to make a change is really the younger population, because they're the people that are, I think, a lot more like activist than we are. And also they're the ones that if they make a change in their life today, they have much longer to live, right? So that's the greatest impact that I think you can make. And that's why we are so at Games for Change involved in working with middle and high school populations, is because that's truly where you are impacting the greater world at the best kind of time, I think, for them to really take on new types of, habits and all of that type of stuff. So specifically with On the Morning You Wake, working with public schools, we primarily focus on Title I schools because we are trying to bring in this technology to places where there isn't access to it. So partnering with school districts, partnering with different organizations that could help us reach that population to really bring that message to as many students as we can. So for general members of the public, we actually have, I don't know are we allowed to talk about what we're doing in New York? Okay, so starting January 20th, we're really excited. We will be showcasing On the Morning You Wake Till the End of the World at MoMI in New York. It's going to be a really great exhibit with a ton of really amazing wraparound materials, like the things that Michaela just talked about. So that's a way, reaching the general public via museums and other activations all over the world. Michaela has literally been in how many countries in the last year? Like, I don't think I can count that high, but everywhere. She was just in Taiwan. We're doing something at ASU right now. We're also doing something at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So we've got a lot of stuff going on, and the team is traveling all the time, constantly getting the message out about this project and really showcasing this incredible work. And then I already mentioned this before, we've shown this project both at the UN and at the Nobel Peace Center, right? So talking to those policymakers, the people that can actually make a difference and really bring this experience to the types of folks, policymakers, diplomats, et cetera, that can get in the right ear for somebody to try to start making this difference and really getting us to a place where nuclear weapons are no longer a part of our world. And then obviously Michaela also mentioned some of the grassroots organizations that we've worked with that are helping us reach both general audiences and then more specific audiences that are focused on this threat more immediately. Let's see what else. Yeah, so I think that covers everything.
Yeah, I would just add to the education piece, also universities, are huge for us too, because I think that there's also a lot of universities are constantly studying science, they're constantly studying nuclear weapons threat, and a lot of them have never experienced nuclear weapons threat from a more human perspective. And so I think this experience really helps bring that into a science-based classroom, but also a poli-sci-based classroom. We're having a lot of screenings right now with the University of Hawaii we're working with. We're also having really great screenings with other universities like Montgomery College that's reached out to us, University of Wisconsin has reached out to us, and we're really trying to find when there's a will, there's a way is what we like to say. So any professor or any teacher out there who wants us to try and bring these headsets, we can easily bring those headsets. They cost less than $5,000 to make. But they also cost less than $400 to ship within the US. So this is not a huge lift to get headsets to classrooms once they're already set up by us. And then we also can offer virtual support. One thing we have found, which Alana touched upon, is a small hack. A lot of museums, they don't like to move their exhibition times around. They usually plan their exhibitions years and years out. But if you go through the education department, a lot of times education department is always looking for fresh new material to bring in their high school students, to bring in their university students, to be able to say, oh, great, maybe we can't block out the whole floor 5 for an exhibition, but we do have an education center. We do have educators. They're constantly looking to program new content. Maybe we can bring your content in through the museum, through our education department. And a lot of times education departments also have pretty good funding to bring in this new content. It's not such a huge lift as maybe what the curation team or the exhibitions team might be dealing with. So just a small hack we've found at Games for Change.
And one quick thing I'll add to that too, for you guys as you're exploring how to help, get your project seen. Local libraries too also have budgets. I don't know if we've explored that for this project specifically, but that's something else to look at because they're always looking for, like a lot of these libraries have innovation centers and new things that they're bringing in, like 3D printing. So I think that could be another interesting avenue to check out.
So mobilization, you're like, okay, you've been talking about it, but how are you really doing it? So I'm going to kind of give you all a little bit of a history around the project. We've touched on a lot of things, a lot of these already, but I think it's nice to just see it like in real time. So the project first premiered in 2022 which is this year. I always say it like it's like, oh, it's been such a long time ago. It feels like, for me at least, it feels like we've been through years of this project, but really it's only 1 year. So we premiered Chapter 1 Take Cover at Sundance Film Festival in January. And as most of you are probably aware, Sundance had to become a virtual festival. And so a part of our impact strategy was to actually put together some headsets, both with our partner Meta, but also with some Games for Change funding we had, to be able to send headsets out to really key people in the nuclear weapons threat policy space, key funders that were interested in funding our impact campaign because we were really starting to ramp up at this point. And we sent them a headset, we sent them a postcard, and we worked with them virtually to support them on how to download the Sundance virtual build here, but also to download on the morning you wake into the headsets so they could actually experience Chapter 1 Take Cover. After that, we went to South by Southwest where we premiered Chapters 2 and 3. And there we were able to bring in our incredible spoken word poet, Dr. Jamaica. And she gave an incredible spoken word performance. And then we had a panel alongside of Amy Seidenworm, one of our executive producers at Meta. And we created our first ever installation for the project. And so I think the biggest thing to remember about your projects or any project is that it's always going to have a life and it's always going to change and adjust. We've never done the exact same thing we did at South by Southwest anywhere else, and that's what makes it really unique. We were thinking about the South by Southwest audience, and so we had this kind of physical aspect where we asked people to write down their answers to certain prompts around nuclear weapons threats, certain prompts around home and safety and security, and we created this really cool kind of collective mural of responses that we have documented. After we went into South by Southwest, we actually premiered the project for free on the Oculus Store. So obviously that was a choice we wanted to make around accessibility. So anyone with a Quest 2 headset anywhere in the world can download this experience for free. There's no paywall. And that was obviously a decision that was made with the producers and the creators. And it doesn't always have to be a decision you make. We've also had experiences like Goliath that we've worked with that have a paywall behind them. And then we usually work to get keys for key partners or keys for key impact activations. But one of the really cool things we did with the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists was that we actually created a Times Square installation. And again, this is to talk about how your project should never look and feel the same for every single thing you do. We were able to receive extra funding from Carnegie to be able to say, well, this is a VR activation and we can only get so many people inside of it, but Times Square is such a huge platform and it's such a public-facing experience. How can we bring the piece outside of the headset and into actually Times Square? And we did it through what we call Photoville Inspired, where we created this kind of big information board, and we had QR codes people could scan, and we had bits of information. And then right down the street around the corner, we had VR screenings happening on multiple days. And then Alana talked a little bit about our exhibition at the Nobel Peace Center. We actually had field trips alongside of the Nobel Peace Center, so over 500 students came. I think the biggest thing, though, to discuss with Nobel Peace Center is that we had to work a lot with localization. Everything had to be localized in Norwegian, and that was a huge lift for us. So just keep that in mind when you're working with international partners. Make sure you get really clear around what the expectation is around localization, not just the VR experience itself, but any piece of content you display on the wall, like a timeline or any information or any video content you might create, make sure you get really clear on, does this need to be in English? Does it need to have closed captions in Spanish? Does it need to be in Norwegian, et cetera, et cetera. So just something to keep in mind when you think about working with international. Nobel Peace Center was an amazing partner because we actually also hosted a conference all around nuclear weapons disarmament ahead of this big meeting that the United Nations had. So Nobel Peace Center invited these really key government policymakers to this conference that was a half day long, where there was discussions around why Norway should join the nuclear peace treaty that the United Nations was discussing, why this is a key moment in Europe's history, why Russia and Ukraine and the geopolitical issues reconnect back to this issue. And it was a really amazing experience where we also had screenings of the experience to these Norwegian policymakers and these Norwegian government officials. We also were involved with Vienna United Nations Nuclear Ban Forum. Vienna had multiple events happening in 1 week, and we were basically involved in all the events in some way, shape, or form. We always had VR screenings happening throughout the events, but we also had panels and discussions happening throughout the event as well. And all of these headsets you're seeing are all from our kits. Those little Pelicans, we just bring 2 to 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, depending on the partner, and we just open them up, we pop them on chargers, and then we get people in the headsets. So none of this was a huge lift for our team. It was a lot of logistical issues, but as far as the technology, those kits make it so easy to just create and build a screening once you're inside a venue. This is us at the United Nations during that same week. So again, the same headsets, the same kits, we just packed them up, rolled them out the door, and then rolled them into the United Nations the next day. We also were involved at Dock Edge, New Zealand. I think it was really important for us to not just think about European folks and US-based folks, but this piece takes place in Hawaii, and Indigenous folks are really important to us as well. And so we really wanted to say, how can we show up for the Indigenous community in this project? And one of the ways we did that was by showcasing this at Dock Edge Festival in Auckland, New Zealand, and inviting Indigenous spoken word poets to actually perform alongside of Dr. Jamaica, and also to be able to have them screen the experience as well. Another way we reached out to not just the Indigenous community, but the community that actually went through the experience was we had a 2-day experience at Apuni, which is a locally owned gallery in Hawaii. And we actually invited all the people who helped us create this project, all the people who lent us their stories. We actually invited them to Apuni as special guests so they can screen and watch the experience they got to be a part of. So for me, the biggest exciting thing about working in a non-traditional documentary medium is that you really get to collaborate with people. It's not just I'm going to set up my camera and have you sit there and tell me your story. Whether you're setting up a volumetric capture thing, whether you're setting up a 360 camera, whether you have a totally different workflow, it takes a certain level of really getting to know somebody and make them comfortable, because you usually have to explain to them what the heck you're doing too. And so it was really cool to see these people that I had only seen as volumetric captures come into the space and watch their own experiences and see how their kaleidoscope of stories interwoven with other people's, watching them take off the headset and actually say wow, it was me. But also having people who weren't involved in the experience come in and watch it and say, I remember where I was that day, or I remember what I was doing that day. And having these collective stories that they were sharing with one another verbally was really interesting too. Working with the University of Hawaii is really important to us as well. We worked at the Games for Change Festival. I think that's a no-brainer there. We also worked with the United Nations in New York, where we had this screening for the Non-Proliferation Treaty event. And then, of course, we've talked about some field trips we've done. We've worked with some smaller film festivals alongside of these smaller entities in the US. So another big part of impact strategy is not just targeting New York, LA, and Chicago, right? We need to take these things and these pieces of content into spaces that people don't always get exposed. So Iowa City's been a space we've been in. We've also been in Montgomery College. We featured the project at Play NYC, featured the project at Techonomy. Techonomy is really interesting too, because this is big business tech executives, right? These are people who are affluent with lots of money, entrepreneurs, investors, academics. And so it was, again, going from Play NYC in New York City, where we had these more indie game developers or people who were interested in getting involved in gaming, to then showcasing it to these white glove what they call them, high net worth people. Is that what you all
High
call
net
them?
worth individuals.
There we go. High net worth individuals. This literally happened within 2 days of each other. Same project, totally different audience. Same VR kits too. Again, just roll them up, pack them up, unroll them, unpack them.
So you don't have special headsets for the high net worth individuals?
I don't.
Okay,
I use the
sorry,
same
guys.
ones. I just wipe them down, and they're fine with using them. So that being said, we're taking this project everywhere and anywhere. We didn't get to highlight Taiwan and other places we've been, but I think the reality is that this takes a monumental amount of effort, but what my team and I have been able to figure out is a really easy solution of popping up and popping down, rolling in and rolling out. So that is the end of our impact activation recap slides. I just want to say thank you so much again for letting us lecture you all today, and thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, and we're excited to hear your questions.
Well, thank you so much.
That's all for Michaela. She did all the heavy lifting.
Incredible impact campaign, and I've quite never seen anything like it. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. If you have questions, let me know, and I will hand you the mic. Let me start with one. One thing I wanted to know is, this is incredible, and you have, systems to make it work and spread it. But what if you're one VR maker? Mm-hmm. Do you have ideas? Do you have, lists or resources for people who want to do their own impact campaign?
Yeah, I would say it's really about not being an island. And I'm going to get a little woo-woo here, but I'm constantly trying to break apart the ideology of imperialism and colonialism in my own life. And I think a lot of what we have been told we need to be as journalists or documentary filmmakers is the one-stop shop for everything and anything. We're being told we need to be the director, the producer, the DP. We're being told we need to be the editor because there's not enough money out there. There's not enough people out there. And your small project is like 100 million of other small projects out there, right? And I think the reality is if you've put time and effort into creating something, you should realize that that is quality over quantity. And if you can find one key partner, if you can find two key collaborators to help you, then that is a successful start of an impact campaign. So first and foremost, please don't try to do this all by yourself. It's there's no way I could have done all this by myself. I had an amazing team behind me, and I was able to find key collaborators and key partners. And funding is, of course, a blocker and an issue, but that's also why there's entities out here like Games for Change. You can reach out to us and say, hey, where should I bring this project to? Your project has a topic. Your project has a story. Where is that most aligned? If it's a project about reproductive rights, if it's a project about mental health, there are organizations out there who can collaborate with you to help bring this to their audiences. And once you start the momentum, it kind of builds on top of itself. Very similar to a film festival circuit. Once one person hears you're there, then they want it. And I would say invest in a little bit of technology you can pop up and pop down and make it as easy as possible for yourself. Don't have this huge setup where you feel like you're going to kill yourself every time you have to go into a new space. Easy as possible. If it's a Magic Leap headset, if it's a Quest 2 headset, if it's an AR experience, make sure you know exactly what kind of conditions you need. Make sure you know exactly what kind of Wi-Fi, what kind of power, so that when you get there to set things up, you're not dealing with technical issues, you're just dealing with liaisoning with people.
Great. I know there's a question.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like there were so many verticals we could go down from everything you said, but I'm going to ask 2 questions and then you guys can decide which one you want to answer. The first is about how you as an organization adapt to changes in the economy and the corporate structure. So you talked about how different funders have verticals, but those verticals are changing, as we've seen in the last 2 months, just by the way that the tech industry is changing. So when you're looking for funding, how are you creating an adaptable framework internally in your organization to be able to keep in touch with, because I don't even know what's going on half the time. So I'm wondering how you're doing it. And the second question is about your pop-in and pop-out framework, right? And one of the things, Milad and I are working on a project similarly right now with education and VR, and the impact of VR lives way beyond the popping in and popping out. So how are you either gathering data about what the effects are after you've left. Because sometimes popping in and popping out reminds me of that journalism extraction mentality of like, we're gonna have a camera and then we're just gonna leave your community and never come back. So just talk to me, maybe riff off of those two questions. Thank you.
I think we can answer both, right?
Totally.
So I'll go with, do you want to go first?
No.
I'll go first. So in terms of the changing marketplace and budgets and all of that, completely agree. The tech industry is just like all over the place. But what's great is there are so many grants out there and there's so many opportunities for funding outside of the space because, so I left Unity right before everything crashed. And then I was like, how am I ever going to find a job, you know? And then I reached out to Susanna because I wanted to go to the festival, and who's the president of Games for Change. And she's like, wait, we were actually hiring. And I was thinking like, oh man, I'm not going to be able to get anything because I come from tech. But there are all these other companies that touch tech but are not tech that still have money, that are still investing in the space. And there's so many amazing foundations and organizations that are putting out grants across all these different interest areas. So it really is just doing the research and understanding, like, if your thing is climate change, what are the 5 to 10, foundations that are supporting that? What are the 5 to 10 nonprofits that are supporting that? Who do I know on LinkedIn that's connected to somebody? Like, LinkedIn is my favorite tool ever as a partnerships person. I'm on there stalking all day, every day. And you know who you can call in favors with and who's willing to make that introduction for you. And it really pays out to really build out that network on LinkedIn and reach out to like-minded people and just say, hey, I'd love a conversational, just like informational interview with you. I'm not looking for anything. I'd love some advice. And some of those conversations that I had years ago have turned into business relationships that I now have. So really recommend kind of doing that and leveraging your network to make those connections.
Mm-hmm. Content is really valuable, and people, no matter where they are, who they are, they're always looking for new content and new ways to engage their audience. So also thinking about you as a creator, what you're willing to do with your project. Are you willing to give it a desktop version of the experience so it can be brought to the public more widely? Or are you really I just want to do headset-based experiences? And if that's what you want to do, then make sure you walk into your partnerships meeting saying that, right? Because some people will be like, well, we were thinking maybe we could do this. And you're like, actually, it's just headset. Okay, cool. So what are you thinking, right? Also coming into a partnership meeting, being ready to have your stakes in the ground to say, this is what the project is, or this is the entity. We actually had some people interested in funding us, and they were like, so the word reducing nuclear weapons? And we were like, actually, that's not going to work for us, right? So we had our stakes in the ground. And I think that's really important because that also shows the potential funder, the potential partner, that you as an entity, you as a creator, you as a producer will be able to execute your vision because you have a very clear vision. And then as far as popping in, popping out, great question. So when I say popping in, popping out, I really mean about the technology, because it can be a huge lift, right? And it's a huge stressor point. And I went through so many sleepless nights not doing it right until we figured out how it made it easier for everybody. But as far as the touch points, so the supplemental materials, the surveys are really our secret sauce. They give us data that is both qualitative and quantitative in an ethical way. And they also, some secret sauce we use is logic jumping. So we actually ask people, what are you interested in? Who are you? And I'll be like, oh, I'm Michaela. I'm a dancer. I'm really interested in creative arts. And we're like, cool. Here's an organization that is creating art around nuclear. The organization's in your inbox within 30 seconds, right? So making not just a physical, tangible human relationship here, but also digital relationships, right? Beyond just follow the project on Instagram. We're actually giving people real life, unique scenarios that they can get involved, right? So if you are Alana says, I'm interested in journalism. Ping, here's an organization that's doing journalism around nuclear weapons threat. Would you like us to text you this information? And if you say no, all good, we then provide you a QR code. And we're like, cool, scan this QR code, and then you'll be able to learn more. And the QR code goes to a toolkit of all the organizations that we recommend. So you can find the organization you got matched with. So that's one way we continue kind of giving you supplemental materials. That's a really easy process. I mean, we use just a Linktree style toolkit. That Linktree style toolkit, like I mentioned, is a cloud-based, so we adjust it for everywhere we go. We just reduplicate the cloud link and then say, okay, here's the Polish resources, here's the American resources, here's the UK resources, here's the Korean resources, right? And we always just reach out to a partner to make it feel more local to where that place is. So that's the ways we touch people with our surveys. Not every project is the same. Every project should have its unique way of wraparound materials. Every project should have its unique way of making an impact. So that is not a one size fits all. It's just what we've decided works really well for On the Morning You Wake. Mm-hmm.
We have a question in the audience. Uvana Minas, Coaches one. The loaner kit sounds great. Do you provide these for regions like India for self-help communities, organizations?
Great question. So with the loaner kits, we highly recommend we can ship them and set them up domestically. But what we usually do with an international partner, like say right now we're working with a partner in Taiwan, we actually recommend that we help them purchase the headsets locally or get the headsets locally, and then virtually we support them in setting up the headset. So usually it costs more money to like set up a headset here in the US and then ship it to the international folk versus spending the $400 we're using shipping to actually let them have a headset they can use for long-term gain. So sometimes that means we're not doing a full 4 headset loaner kit. With Taiwan, we did 2 headsets where they got it shipped locally in Taiwan, and then we shipped them and recommended to them individual lunchbox kind of style of kits, and then we made sure that they had extra batteries, and then my team got on a Zoom call with them and walked them step by step through setting up the headset, downloading the experience. We set them up with a flow code or a link tree, which has all their toolkit resources. We set them up with their own Typeform account so they can localize the Typeform to not Taiwanese, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, right? So we're giving them the tools so that that organization can take it and run with it, so that we're not the gatekeepers. That's one style of partnership we do. We've also done more white glove where we have shipped headsets abroad. It just tends to get very expensive. So again, it's always about that constellation. What star, what size, how hot is it burning, and what can we do to connect it to our experience and to our project?
Another question from You Think Who. It's a monumental effort, the person says.
Thank you.
How many people are there on the core team?
I was going to actually ask Michaela that question in the middle of her talking because it sounds like she's got a team of like 50 that she's working with. But how big is the team, Michaela?
It's like 3 people. Okay, so originally it was just me working alongside of Susanna. So I was the main impact producer from January to March. So I basically pushed the project out for Sundance. I brought in 1 production coordinator to work with me part-time to help me push it out to South by Southwest. And then we were able to get enough funding where I could bring that production coordinator on in a more full-time capacity on a monthly stipend. And that production coordinator has been working with me solely up until August. So it was really a 2-person team up until August. And then after August, we were able to bring in 1 more production coordinator, and my coordinator is now my manager. So now it's me as the impact producer. I have a production manager because we have so many incoming partnership requests. That's all she can now focus on, is just getting these partnership requests in the door, producing the activations, producing the partnership. And then she has 1 production coordinator she works with. And then there's me. And we just brought in a mentee. I'm trying to stay away from the word intern. I think it's got some old baggage we can let go of, but I've just brought in a mentee to just help me a little bit with the day-to-day. So it's basically a team of 2 turned 3 recently, and now pseudo 4, but it's really not a huge team.
Those partnerships.
Yeah.
That's key, right?
But a huge part of what we do is also educating those partners, right? A lot of those partners come to us and they're like, we've never done VR. Or a lot of them come to us and they're like, we don't know what a VR documentary is. And we're like, cool, starting you off on square one. What does that mean? Are we, making sure you find a headset locally so you can get in the headset? Are we shipping you a headset so you can see it? And there's a lot of education steps that have to happen before we get a signed partnership agreement. But the good news is being at the United Nations, being at the Nobel Peace Center, screening this project at Play NYC, Techonomy, once people see it at these events, they're like, oh, I get it. I want you to come to my event. Oh, I want you to come to my organization, right? So those also start to plant the seeds to create the ripple and to create the momentum.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your talk. It's really good. It's so exciting to see such a profound project, and it's doing so well. And my question is about, well, first of all, you've put so many people in headsets and let them and been able to watch them, which I really like to do as well. And so my question is about the tension or the relationship between like being on mission and sort of telling the story. What do you think is most successful in trying to balance when you're having the person like have to do something versus like telling them? What do you think is most successful for people? What are sort of the biggest aha moments or the things that work the most that when you observe people doing things? Thanks.
Yeah. It's two things, and they're both double-edged sword. I'm not saying one thing is better than the other. On the Morning You Wake is an immersive film. It is 3D, and you can move around the space spatially, but it's not meant to be an interactive game. It's really meant to be a seated, immersive experience. So the double-edged blade there is like it's very easy for me to get somebody in a headset. It's very easy for them to be able to look around and like be engaged. But on the other hand, you're like, Michaela, it's the world of VR. Like, shouldn't they be walking around and picking things up, right? So yes, there's some level of interactivity I give up by having this more immersive style experience. The three things I have found that are super helpful, just for anyone using VR. One, you always ask for patience and communication. Patience because it's going to take me a few tries to make sure the headset feels really good on your head. And communication because I don't know what you're feeling. So if the headset's too tight, if it's too loose, tell me. If it's blurry, tell me. I want you to have a good experience, right? So I always ask for patience and communication, and I train my staff to always ask for that too. So, patience also because it's new technology and things might go wrong. That's the gist of it. Third, always show your participant or your audience member what your menu screen looks like or what the thing is that you want them to see in headset. You're making them go into a headset blind. It's really hard for them to tell you like, oh, I see a bunch of red particles. You're like, okay, are they looking at the back of the menu or the front of the menu? Like, where are they in the space? Versus on my iPad or on my phone or on my device, I literally say, this is what our menu looks like. If you don't see this, please let me know. I will get you there, right? I will make sure you're there, but this is where you should be. This is your home base. Then you're planting the seed for them to help them feel more comfortable. And the final thing I do is I always show them a hand controller. I always show it to them. I go, this is a hand controller. You'll be using this once or twice to select your chapter, and once or twice because it's going to vibrate and you're going to see something pop up. This is your finger. This is the finger you select. If you get lost, don't worry, I'll be there, but I just want you to see it ahead of time. And people will literally tell me, I've done this before. I'll be like, okay, great. I just want to make sure you know. They'll get into headset and they'll start clicking the A-B button. I'll be like, no, it's the button that I showed you before. But what you're doing is you're taking an extra 2 minutes with that person to plant seeds in their head of what they need to know before they get on the headset and they have no idea what's going on. And I've found by doing those three things, it saves me over 6 minutes of troubleshooting with someone who's not familiar with VR.
They want to know if that's really helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, but did you let them know you can see them? All right, we have a question. How interactive is this VR game? I saw many players sitting in chairs while playing. Is it mainly for viewing? More interactive experiences require standing, moving.
Mm-hmm. So like I said before, this is an immersive experience. It's not meant to be experienced as a 6-stop walk around. That being said, when I've worked in 6-stop walk around experiences, because I have produced and created and impact campaigned those types of experiences before, a whole nother world. And I think the biggest thing you have to realize is you need, when you're at the creation process for those experiences, I'm sure Alana can speak to this too, you need to troubleshoot, and test. Because the hardest thing for anybody who's trying to show a VR experience is when the interactivity is not intuitive and you have to tell them, do you see the blue button? Do you see the blue button? I need you to go click that blue button, right? Like it just creates this like tension point of like, you're trying to make it interactive and realistic, but then you have someone having to tell that person what they're being asked to do. So test at the creation level. But also that level of design, that level of interactivity, it also means you need to probably add 2 more minutes to your onboarding time. 2 more minutes. On the Morning You Wake probably takes about 3 minutes for me to like onboard somebody fully and then get them in a headset. Maybe takes another 2 minutes. And I know these minutes need to be counted because you also have to think about how quickly you're getting people in and out of headset when you're thinking about capacity, which is huge. Everyone always asks me about capacity. So I would say whenever you're working with a 6DOF experience, you need to give yourself 4 to 5 minutes to onboard. 4 to 5 minutes. And it might feel like a really long time, but you need that time to be able to make sure that person knows what's going on, to make sure that person knows what they're going to do, to make sure you really set yourself up for success. Because the goal of VR is to put somebody in a headset, walk away. Make sure they're okay, but walk away. If you are in a VR experience where you're sitting there every 2 minutes making sure they're doing the right thing, I think we need to go back to the drawing board of what you've created.
All right, another question. I saw the presenters are talking about estimated reach. This is certainly one way to evaluate the effect. Any empirical studies being done?
Yes. So the surveys actually ask, did you learn something new? The surveys actually ask, are you interested in learning more about nuclear weapons threat now that you've seen this experience? If we're showing the experience to grassroots organizers or policymakers, we add in a question that says, hey, does this change the way you're going to approach your work now that you've seen this experience? So we have very clear before, the onboarding survey is very quick and easy, but the aftercare survey really goes in depth about their reactions, their engagement. We're also measuring engagement by, if you're willing to give us your phone number, what does that mean? Like, now you've created this intimate connection with us. You've created this ability for us to say, hey, have you followed up with your resource? Or, hey, have you gotten involved in nuclear weapons threat? And that's just a quick click away. And to me, that's actually really interesting because there's a difference between someone giving them your email and versus your phone number. So that's one of the many ways. There's more. I could talk about that for a whole nother lecture.
So quickly for the offboarding, what you were saying 3 to 5 minutes onboarding and then offboarding with the questionnaire, how do you do that? And is that in a separate space?
Great question, Alana. It depends on the venue. Depends totally on the venue. When we pop experiences up at different venues, we always think about the traffic flow, we always think about the comfortability, and we always think about the safety of folks. So usually the aftercare area is a separate quiet area that we've built as much as we can. That means it could be a separate table away from where people are waiting or away from where people are constantly walking up and down the hallways. And that aftercare part usually takes between 5 to 7 minutes. And I say that generously because it depends on also how quickly people go through the experience of the survey. Because the survey has a lot of reflective questions, but the survey also has a lot of click and keep going questions. So I've seen people take 10 minutes on that survey because they're really trying to tell us how they're feeling, or they're really trying to tell us what impacted them the most. But I've also seen people blast through it, which, full respect, that's fine. That's probably what I would do. I'd blast through something like that.
Same.
But I think it's never, like I said before, it's never a one-to-one. It's never like, we did it this way before, so we have to do it this way again. I'm constantly open to learning. I'm constantly open to making it better or improving or changing things.
It's interesting, at film festivals, there's a lot of bemoaning of where it goes once it leaves a film festival. Thinking about how you don't call it distribution, you call it mobilization. Is that the trick, and are you seeing a lot more uptake for VR, or is it still a struggle? Do people, react well, or do you really have to knock down a lot of doors? Because in the field in general, it's an issue.
What do you feel, Alana?
I don't know. I mean, it's definitely, it's an interesting space. Listen, I don't know if a survey is necessarily going to make a difference in that, macro level. But I think with the distribution of VR headsets, the amount of headsets that are in market now, I saw just yesterday that there are as many VR headsets as there are Xboxes in the market, which is that's pretty mainstream, So I think we're at a place now where it's really exciting. And were you saying that On the Morning You Wake is one of the biggest narrative downloaded experiences in the Oculus store?
What is the
Somebody
number?
told me. I'm not allowed to say it. That's the one thing I'm not allowed to share.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's Meta is so not open to sharing their numbers of headsets, so everything's very speculative. And I've heard all sorts of wide ranges of numbers, but it's in the double-digit millions from what I've heard. But I don't actually know real information like Michaela does because she's on an NDA that she's not allowed to share with anybody. But the point is it's there. There's that scale there where a few years ago, it was still a few million headsets that were in market, and so now I think we are at a place where there are a lot of people that have at least tried VR one time, right? Which means they're open to trying it again, and they're open to trying it in a different way, because a game is so different than this type of experience. And it is also, it's a big commitment. You know, a lot of these narrative experiences, they're 20 minutes, they're 45 minutes. So you're really like sitting down and really buckling in. And when you're talking about something like nuclear disarmament, that's a really heavy topic, which is why Michaela works so hard to create these materials that really help support the experience. That's really so important when you're talking about these very serious issues that could be triggering, that could, you know, so my sister-in-law and brother-in-law were in Hawaii when that happened, actually, and they had, their baby wasn't with them, you know, and for those minutes. So every time we talk about this experience, I get emotional just thinking about how they must have felt, right? So I can only imagine, you know, the wider community of people that are seeing this and their own personal stories with it.
Yeah, and I'm a technology agnostic person. Like, I'm not going to sit up here and tell you VR is exactly what you should be doing as a creator or as a producer or as a director. Your medium is your choice. I just know for me, when I specialize with like virtual reality, even augmented reality or mixed reality or AI or holograms, anything that's like cutting edge, we used to be bleeding edge, but I think now we're cutting edge, of technology, you're always going to be dealing with like onboarding, right? You could walk up to a person that is a hologram and start speaking to them. They have AI integration, and there's always going to be someone who's like, I don't get it. Or there's always going to be somebody who's like, well, how is this really making an impact? Or how is this really changing the world? You can only put one of these holograms for every like 4 buildings in the rest of the US, because only 4 buildings can actually like power the thing, right? Like, but the reality is like, you're pushing the medium forward. So A, there's that. B, quality over quantity is always what I say about VR. It's all about quality over quantity. Like, I think that VR as a medium is probably here to stay, but that doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to be the most mainstream cool thing tomorrow, and that's okay. Like, if you're sticking to your guns and saying, I'm creating a story that is meant to be in VR because blank, and this is the impact I want to make with this experience because blank, then the reality is you're probably going to be successful at creating a campaign around that project, and you're probably going to find very key people. It might not be these big prestigious names that we're talking about today, like the Nobel Peace Center and the United Nations. It might be your local library. It might be your local university. It might be a small community center for women who are going through domestic trauma here in Boston and maybe in some other city. But that is the impact your project is making. That should not be compared to the impact that a project is making that is being screened by Sundance Film Festival and South by Southwest Film Festival that then goes on to go premiere at other places. Like, your project is specific to you. Your project is specific to your impact. And that is 100% okay. Like, it doesn't need to get these like ideas of institutions and levels of ideologies around what impact is. Impact is specific to you, and it's specific to your project.
Do you make that argument about that kind of impact to your funders or sponsors?
Yeah, like when
Who does sponsor you? Where do you get the funding for what you do?
So Carnegie, which has a huge interest in nuclear weapons disarmament, because Andrew Carnegie originally helped fund the creation of nuclear weapons, actually was like a huge proponent of like funding this project, because they were like, you're not at the creation phase, right? I think a lot of people come to Carnegie and they're like, hey, we want you to fund this piece of content to be made. And they're like, we don't really fund content being made. But we were coming to them being like, the content is made, right? I can talk about who funded the production of the project, but I think right now we're focused on the impact. So Carnegie was like, great, you all have a finished project. It's ready to go. You just need funding to get it to Times Square. You just need funding to get it to Vienna. 1,000%, here's some money, right? That's a totally different pitch than saying, hi, I'm a creator. Hypothetically, I want to create this cool creative project. Hypothetically, I want to make this thing. Plowshares was the same way. They were like, wow, you have a finished piece of nuclear weapons disarmament media. We can fund you going to the Nobel Peace Center. We can fund you doing a museum exhibition. Meta came in and funded us because we were a finished project. Wow, we can actually research the impact of VR versus 2D. Great, let's fund that research. So totally different way of pitching than I think when you're in this like production pitch process. You're in a more powerful position, I think, and you're also in a position of saying, this is the vision of the project. It's going to happen with or without you as an impact funder, versus being a producer and being like, this could happen if you give me this funding. We couldn't make this thing.
There's a question about design. How many people did they use for the play test for improvement of the design? How long did the whole play testing period last?
For the production of the project or for the impact campaign?
It looks like they're saying for the improvement of the design.
So it sounds like impact campaign, right? I think
Could
the
be
production,
design.
okay.
Take
So,
your pick.
Atlas V and Archersmark worked on this project for 2 years. I'm sure they did a lot of internal testing. I was not a part of it. I came in once the project was basically ready to go. So I can only speak to what I know. With us, we use South by Southwest as our South by Southwest was like my war zone. Like I was sitting there as an impact producer, like all these hypothetical ideas I had that I had tried out in my living room or with my friend. I was like, this will work. I had to keep, every day I think I had to take something out, or every day I had to adjust something, or every day I was ripping down pipe and drape, or every day I was resituating the chairs because I was constantly trying to improve it at South by Southwest. And then even again, when we went to the Nobel Peace Center in April, I was constantly improving. So the playtesting happens in the field and it happens in the lab. But I think 100% if you're playtesting something in a lab, get it out of the lab. Put it in the real workspace. Let people get a little frustrated. Let people trip over their own backpack because they left it right there where you told them not to. And that's why you always have a place for personal belongings, right? Like let the messiness happen in the field. It's okay. It's okay. Like I'm a perfectionist. I got really embarrassed. I got really upset with myself and I had to keep telling myself it's okay. It'll get better. And it has gotten better. And now we have improved and we're always improving. Always. We just did a whole nother update to the surveys because I was like, these questions were not as impactful as I thought they were when I first wrote them. So, yeah.
And with the venues, every venue is so different. We had like a project that was screening at the Cannes Lions Festival, and we were set up in these cabanas where everything was glass, which we didn't know. We thought we were going to have walls. And so then, the experience that we had was a 6-DOF experience, and it was interacting with the sensors. It was a disaster. Like we had to and so thankfully we had been there a day early. So we figured that out, had to like go to the store and buy a bunch of random materials to block things so that we were able to do the experience. So that's the thing too. Every venue is so different. So you just never know what you're going to get until you're there regardless of what pictures they send you and renderings, like you just never know. You can't trust it till you're there on the ground. So always give yourself 1 or 2 days.
100%. And I highly recommend if you're going to bring 4 or more headsets somewhere abroad that uses a different electrical converter. I think I almost shut down the Nobel Peace Center for a whole day because I tried to plug in 20 American headsets to a European converter. I think I burnt out like 3 power strips. Like these are just things that happen, right? And these are just things that you learn as you go. So now we have like very good converters for everywhere we go, universally.
Does Oculus sell like a different charger for different countries?
Yeah, you have to still buy the whole.
Oh,
so you can either just get the Type C. Yeah, I'd be like running around Vienna's Best Buy being like, oh my God, do you all have a Type C converter? So these are all, and that's the special thing of being on the cutting edge. Like if it was perfect, we would all be doing films where we could sit in a movie theater and someone could display the beautiful image for us at the exact res that we exported and everyone could sit there and do the same thing we've been doing for 50 plus years. But that's not what we're doing. And that's just the reality is like sometimes we have to completely mirror off our mirrored walls.
Just look up the hardware stores before you get there. That's actually the biggest learning from today, I think.
And always ask about lighting. Because lighting is huge depending on what kind of tracking you're using. Like the Oculus headset, if you're a 6-DOF experience and the lighting is dark, it'll be like tracking lost. And you're like, oh God. So like always talk about lighting with your venues, always talk about your power situation. Yeah, it's a good time.
So XR for Impact has been around for 5 years. Right? And what is the overall strategy? Is it how many campaigns do you do at once? How do you also do reach in terms of how you work with VR makers and their projects? And is it evolving? Where are you going?
Michaela?
So XR for Change has been an initiative that's been around since 2017. And when it first started, it really started as a way to say Games for Change is interested in building this community. Games for Change sees that there's this really intimate creation process and an intimate executive production process and an intimate mobilization process. And that's really key for creating impact. And so really where they started was as a entity to create white papers around research, curating their annual festival with an XR category, but they had never executive produced an original project until On the Morning You Wake. And so I kind of got into this project as a contractor. And as I was speaking to Susanna, the president, she really shared with me a vision for XR for Change to really step into a new era as we see that there's a huge need for impact productions, impact campaigns, but also a continual need to expand and support this community. So I'm currently transitioning from contractor to full-time to take on the role of head of XR, working very closely with Alana. I am so appreciative of you, by the way. Like Alana, like the ability that Alana has to create partnerships and the ability that Alana has to create these really key constellations for me as head of XR will allow me to hopefully one day create programs for how people are doing when they're at the development phase. Hey, do you want me to pair you with an impact producer? Well, Games for Change has an impact producer course around XR. Instead of you having to have a white glove experience from Games for Change, I can play matchmaker and say, hey, this impact producer is looking to talk about the issue around migration and immigration in the US, and your project is about that. I think you two should get along really well, right? So like those kind of speed dating moments. Also, like my vision is to have like an impact campaign production bridge, basically, where instead of there being like, hey, you want to fund a production, you're like, hey, you want to fund an impact campaign. G4C will set up all the funders we know, all the universities that are looking for research, and you bring your projects and let's see if we can make magic happen. So that's the cool thing I really like about G4C and where Alana really sits in that partnership level. We have such a unique network and we get to be the person that can connect everybody to each other in that network. So my hope is that you don't come to G4C and you're like, hopefully you choose me as one of 3 projects that you take on for your impact campaign. Instead, I can say, hey, your project's super dope. I've got 3 people I want to introduce you. By the way, are you free next week for a Meet the Funders event? Because I have somebody I also want to introduce you at the Meet the Funders event where you can present your project. Like that's my goal for XR for Change. And putting out best practices, putting out morals and ethics around XR creation. So it's a very large idea and vision I have, and it's just starting. It's not like finished, and it's just in this messy process. And that's the beauty of like sitting with Alana and creating strategies. It's like, how do we get these funded? Who's going to come in and fund like a diversity initiative program? Who's going to come in and fund an impact production bridge?
That's wonderful. That's really neat. It looks like there's one more question here. Did you do an effectiveness study on this campaign? I think we talked about that a little. Like pre and post intervention surveys on knowledge awareness increase as well as behavioral intention change.
Yeah, we're currently doing that. We have already done the pre and post, but we're currently expanding it to behavior change, and that will be coming to you soon, early something 2023. And just keep an eye out for it. That's all I can really say. It's coming, and there will be a resource that we put out in the world about what we've done with On the Morning You Wake that will be very in-depth around not just what we found in the research, but the best practices we put together. And we're hoping that'll be a guide map and also a really key way that you all can see everything I'm talking about put onto paper with analytics, with research and everything. So that's another part too, is like not just keeping it all to ourselves, but putting it out into the community.
When is that coming out?
Something 2023.
No commitment. You know, these things always change.
All right.
I think Q1. I guess Q1 is like a quicker way of saying
early,
things, right?
early Q2, maybe, to be safe.
Okay, early Q2, 2023.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was really inspiring and enlightening. So many ideas, so much information, so much work. Congratulations. And thank you to the audience for being here today. And we will see you back in the spring semester. This is our last public talk of this semester. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.